Hello and welcome to Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies. This episode, well, bear with me. I'm a little sick on this and my voice is coming and going. Hence why we had a break last week. Really couldn't talk at all. So bear with me. We'll try to do what we can. We'll get an episode out to you. It was late autumn afternoon when Peter found himself alone on the windswept slopes of Ben MacDhui, the highest peak in the Cairngorms. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the mountain, casting long, eerie shadows across the desolate terrain. The chill in the air was sharp, but it wasn't the cold that made Peter's skin prickle. Something just felt wrong. His every step seemed to echo unnaturally in the thin mountain air, as though the stones themselves whispered warnings he couldn't quite make out. Then it began. First, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, not his own. Peter froze, his breath catching in his throat, but the sound didn't stop. Slowly, he turned his head, scanning the barren ridge for any sign of another climber. But the mountain, it was empty. Yet the footsteps grew louder, closer, and with them came pressure in the air, a thickening, like the atmosphere had somehow become alive, wrapping him in an oppressive blanket of dread. Then he saw it. Out of the corner of his eye, a figure, tall, impossibly tall, emerged from the mist that clung to the peaks. It moved with unnatural grace, its form indistinct and shifting, as though it were a shadow given substance. It was gray, hulking, and towered far above any human. And though Peter couldn't see his face clearly, he felt its eyes, cold, watching, and ancient, boring into him. Panic gripped him. Every rational thought left his mind as instinct took over, and he ran. He ran as fast as his legs would carry him, down the steep, treacherous slope, barely aware of the jagged rocks beneath his feet. But no matter how fast he ran, he could feel it following. It didn't need to run. It didn't need to hurry. It was there, just out of sight, one step behind him, and closing in. Finally, when his lungs burned and his muscles ached, he collapsed near a small outcropping of rocks. The footsteps stopped. The presence was gone, but the feeling of dread remained, like a stain on his very soul. Peter never returned there after that day. He never spoke of it to anyone. Well, not in detail, but his wide, haunted eyes told the story when he warned fellow climbers to steer clear of the mountain's upper slopes. And it wasn't until the day he died that he told this story to somebody. The topic of tonight's episode is this one, it's got what looks like English to me, but it's the Am Fear Liath Mòr, or the Big Gray Man of Ben MacDhui. We'll probably just call him the Big Gray Man or the Gray Man. The Gray Man is not your typical cryptid. Its legend is woven into the very stones of the Cairngorms, shrouded in mystery and terror. Descriptions of this figure vary slightly depending on the witnesses, but the commonalities are enough to send chills down the spine of even the most hardened skeptic. Standing at an estimated height of 10 feet or more, this creature is described as a towering, humanoid figure, cloaked in a gray mist that seemed to swirl around it. Its body is vaguely human, yet unnervingly wrong, as if it belongs to a different time, perhaps a different realm. Its arms are long, hanging down to its knees or lower, and it moves with an unnatural fluidity that defies its size. The most haunting detail, however, is its face, or the lack thereof. Witnesses who have caught a glimpse of its visage speak of a shadowy, featureless head with no clear eyes, mouth, or nose, and yet every account emphasizes the feeling of being watched, as though the creature's gaze is ever present, even when unseen. The sense of dread it brings is palpable, often causing physical illness or overwhelming fear in those who encounter it. The origins of the Gray Man are as murky as the mists that surround Ben MacDhui. Some claim it is the spirit of the mountain itself, an ancient guardian of the peaks, whose purpose is to keep humans away from places they don't belong. Others suggest as a remnant of something far older, predating human presence in the highlands, a being that walked the earth long before we ever did. Whatever the truth is, one thing is certain. Those who venture too far into its domain often come back changed, if they come back at all. Ben MacDhui, and like I said, I'm trying to pronounce these things. Sorry if it is horribly wrong. Let me know in the comments. But the Ben MacDhui is its home, and the mountain seems to breed an air of isolation and fear. The desolate peaks, the howling winds, and the ever-present mist create the perfect atmosphere for something otherworldly to thrive. The Gray Man does not attack, at least not physically, but its power lies in its ability to terrify. It feeds on fear, and perhaps that is its true purpose, to remind those who climb too high that some places are not meant for human feet. Peter's story may have been one of the more restrained encounters, but there are others who have met the big gray man under even more terrifying circumstances. Each encounter adds a new layer to the mystery, suggesting that the being is more than just a trick of the mind or an illusion born from fear. Take Mev, for instance. She was an experienced hiker, familiar with the unpredictable conditions of the Scottish Highlands. She had always prided herself on her ability to navigate through fog and rock with calm precision. But that confidence shattered one bleak November morning when she found herself alone on Ben MacDhui, the summit hidden behind the impenetrable wall of mist. "I could feel it before I saw it," she said. The air turned thick, heavy, not just cold but oppressive, like the weight of an entire mountain was pushing down on me. It was in a strange atmosphere that she first heard it, the low, rhythmic thudding of footsteps. She quickened her pace, thinking perhaps it was another climber. But as she turned around, expecting to find a fellow hiker, she saw nothing but a wall of gray fog. The footsteps, however, grew louder and closer. I didn't want to look again. Something in me screamed not to, but curiosity, or maybe fear, made me turn, and that's when I saw it. Through the fog emerged a massive figure, easily twice the height of any man. Its form was solid, yet at the same time it seemed to waver, as if it were part of the mist itself. The gray shroud clung to its body, and Mayev could just make out the elongated arms, reaching nearly to the ground. The air around her grew colder, and her limbs froze in place. I couldn't move. It was like I was rude to the spot staring at this thing, its face. No, there was no face, just this dark space where a head should be, but I swear it was watching me. Time seemed to stretch as Mayev stood there, locked in a gaze of the faceless entity. Then in a blink, the figure was gone, swallowed by the mists. Mayev collapsed on the ground, her body shaking violently. It took hours before she gathered enough strength to descend the mountain. Even now, years later, she claims that memory of that cold, faceless presence haunts her dreams. Then there's the story of Alistair. And like Mayev, Alistair encountered the big gray man on a rare, clear day. He had set out early, eager to take advantage of the pristine weather and reach the summit before the notorious Scottish fog rolled in. But even in the bright sunlight, the creature found him. I had almost reached the top, Alistair recounted. It was beautiful, blue skies, crisp air, but out of nowhere, the shadows began to move. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the shadows started shifting, like they had a life of their own. And from those shadows, it stepped out. Alistair described the figure as more solid than the others had, yet just as terrifying. It was enormous, its gray form blotting out the sun, casting a dark silhouette across the rocks. Its limbs were impossibly long, its posture hunched, yet towering. "I couldn't run," Alistair said. "Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. My legs just wouldn't move. I tried, but it was like this thing had control over me." For what felt like an eternity, Alistair was paralyzed, his body frozen in place while the figure loomed over him. Unlike Mayev, Alistair didn't sense eyes on him, but he felt something worse, a suffocating presence, as though the air itself had turned against him. And then it was gone. Just like that. Vanished into the shadows, but that feeling, that sense of being trapped, like I was a prisoner in my own body, it stayed with me. Alistair never returned to Ben MacDhui, and he swears that whatever the big gray man is, it's not just a creature of the mountain. It's a predator, waiting for its next victim. But the most harrowing account comes from a man named Gregor. Unlike the others, Gregor had spent years working as a ranger in the Cairngorms. He was no stranger to the wilds and the legends that surrounded Ben MacDhui, but he had never given much thought to the stories of the big gray man. That changed one cold December night. Gregor was making his rounds near the base of the mountain, ensuring that no climbers had ventured too far up in the worsening weather. The wind was howling, and the snow began to fall heavily, creating a whiteout that made it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. "It was the footsteps I heard first," Gregor said, "but these were different. They weren't just heavy, they were deliberate, like something big was walking, and it was walking just behind me, and it didn't care if I knew." He turned, expecting to see an animal, perhaps another ranger, but instead there was only darkness. The snow had muffled the landscape, and the visibility was near zero. But as Gregor squinted into the void, something shifted. A form, tall, impossibly tall, began to materialize out of the storm. It was like a shadow, but not. It was more solid, more real than the snow around it, and it was walking right toward me. The figure grew clear as it approached, its hulking form towering over Gregor, blocking out what little light there was. Gregor backed away, but the creature followed, never hurrying, never breaking its steady pace. But the terror came not from the speed of its approach, but from the inevitability of it. No matter how fast Gregor moved, the creature would always be right behind him. I ran, but I knew it didn't matter. It was trying to catch me. It was just there, watching, following. For hours Gregor ran through the snow, his mind consumed with fear, certain that at any moment the figure would reach out and pull him into the dark. It wasn't until he collapsed near the ranger station, completely exhausted, that the figure disappeared. They say it doesn't kill you, but I'm not so sure, Gregor whispered. It's something in you. After that night, I was never the same. That mountain, well, there's something wrong with it. There are countless other stories, many of them told in hushed whispers by those who have dared to venture too far into the misty heights of Ben MacDhui. Each story is different, but all share the same chilling theme, the feeling of being watched, the footsteps that follow, and the shadowy figure that lurks just beyond the edge of sight. So the next time you find yourself on a lonely mountain slope, with the mist closing in around you and the eerie silence of the highlands pressing down your shoulders, remember, you might not be alone. Something might be watching, waiting just a step behind you, its footsteps echoing into the fog. Thank you for joining me tonight on Lunitar's Legends, Lore, and Lies. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow the show and share it with those who love a good mystery. Till next time, keep your eyes open, because you never know what lurks in the shadows. One more thing before we leave. If you're into role-playing games, tabletop RPGs, Call of Cthulhu, Dungeons and Dragons, those kind of things, just know that I just put out a new magazine. The first issue came out in February here, and I'm working diligently on the second episode. It has modules, news, upcoming events, legendary loot in it. It's got all sorts of stuff, and I'm looking to build it up more. I'm looking for people in the community to kind of help out and give me articles or whatever. Or if you just want to read it, head on over to my webpage, lunitarproductions.com, and you'll find it there under the tab for Dragonfire Magazine. All right, you can also find this podcast there. But thanks for watching, listening, however you're consuming this, and I hope to see you on the next one.